Megan Avery from Hipstitch Academy here. I'm on a quest to teach as many people as I can how to sew, and because of this I teach classes and I make these videos to hopefully help you with your own sewing endeavors. I made this button-down dress and decided it needed pockets. The pattern for the dress is down below, but I added the pockets and I decided I wanted to add some Sashiko to the pockets. It's a Japanese embroidery technique, and I got the design from this great book, Make and Mend. I've also linked the book down below. The design I chose is called Square and Diamond, so let's get started. First off, I'm drawing little marks that are 1 inch apart so that I can draw vertical lines each an inch from the next line. So I'm just going to make little tick marks and then use a ruler to draw the lines. Next up, I'm going to draw 1 inch tick marks along the horizontal axis of the pockets, and then I'm going to use those little marks to draw horizontal lines that are 1 inch from each other all the way from the top to the bottom of the pocket, just like I'm doing here. Now I'm going to draw diagonal lines, and I'm just starting right in the middle, and each diagonal line is again 1 inch apart, and I'm basically just going through the boxes that are already on there. When you draw the diagonal lines the other way, you're going to start to form 2 inch diamonds on your pattern. Now it's time to stitch. So thread your Sashiko needle with a needle threader, or just thread it without. I like to use a needle threader. And you're just using a single strand. I knot the end of my thread. You don't have to, you could just leave it hanging longer. But I like to knot mine, so I'll do my first stitch, and then I'm going to do a series of in and out stitches along that first horizontal line. I'll do like 5 or 6 in and outs, and then I'll gently pull. And I'm really careful not to pull too tight because it will scrunch it up. And then I'm going to do that again. And pull it once I've got 5 or 6 on my needle and I'm staying on that line. I'll pull the rest of the thread through, make sure there's no gathering, and continue until I get to the end of that line. Now, when I go to do the next row, I'm starting from the other side and I'm coming up from the bottom. Now, don't pull tight. Leave yourself some slack in the form of this loop. So in case anything gets too gathered up, you've got a little extra thread to make sure that the piece of fabric stays flat. And again, I'm just getting 5 or 6 in and outs onto my needle, and then I'm pulling through. And when you pull that first one through, be careful not to pull it tight. Leave the slack at the beginning. And I'm just continuing this way until I get to the end of this line. Same thing happens when we start that third line. We just repeat the process until we get all of the horizontal lines done. And voila, look, the horizontal lines are done. Now you're going to do the same thing with the vertical lines only. So start at your first vertical line, start from the bottom, come up, and continue to make these same small stitches along each of the vertical lines. our vertical lines. Next up is the first set of diagonal lines. We're just repeating the process on each of the diagonal lines going in one direction. And you guessed it, finally, we're doing the other direction, diagonal lines, continuing the process. I know it seems like a lot of stitching, but I'll be honest, I think I had to do 3 pockets because I ended up the first time sewing 2 left pockets, which was a real drag, but it helped me practice and get better. And I would say it probably takes about 45 minutes to do all of the Sashiko stitching. So even though it's, all sped up in this video, it really doesn't take as long as you would think. So give it a try. Okay, so finally you're gonna take once you've got all that stitching on there, you're gonna take the other pocket piece, the mirror image of the one you just stitched, and place it on top of the stitched one with right sides facing, and then pin it all together along the curved edge. You'll see the straight edge is actually not going to get sewn in this step. I used a lot of pins because I wanted everything to really just stay lined up as I sew. So now I'm over at the sewing machine. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew along the curved edge, the one that I just pinned. I'm going to try not to sew over any pins because that's just not good for your sewing machine. And here I go, sewing around that curve, and I'm going to come back to where that straight edge begins. Let's back stitch, and before we turn it right side out, let's clip the seam allowance. So basically I'm just snipping about 1 inch apart into the seam allowance without stitching the without snipping the stitching. And then once you do that, you can turn it right side out. It's going to allow for a nicer curve and for everything to lay a little bit flatter once you turn it right side out. We've got a raw edge along that straight edge. I'm just going to tuck that all in so it's nice and clean. I'm going to pin that. And this is the edge that we are going to sew closed. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew that edge closed. A lot of times when I'm teaching people how to do pockets and it's like a double layered pocket like this, they think by sewing that shut, we're sewing the pocket shut, but really that pocket is going to lay on top of the dress like this. I've tried the dress on, figured out where I want that pocket to be, And then I'm pinning it in place, and I'm gonna sew around all the edges except that straight edge. So pin it on there, very good, and then that's where I'm gonna sew, leaving that straight part open. So slide the dress where the pocket is pinned under the presser foot. Be really careful. Slide it over there and make sure you're only sewing the one layer of the dress and then the pocket. It's really going to be quite thick here because you're sewing over a lot of layers. So go slow, and every time you stop to pull a pin out, also just adjust your fabric just to make sure that nothing else is getting sucked under there and you're only sewing the layer of the dress, one layer of the dress, and then the pocket. Take your time and make your way all the way back to the other side of that straight edge. Be sure to backstitch to secure it on there. And you can see once you've slid it off your sewing machine, you've got a great little pocket. Now that you've got one on, you're going to repeat the process to put the other side on. Just make sure that you flip when you cut the denim and don't make two pockets for the same side. I know from experience, this is not fun. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions or comments, you can leave them below or head on over to the hipstitch.co website and get in touch with us there.